workstation manufacturer that we really focus on content creators, so filmmakers, colorists, that kind of a thing. And Puget's been around since 2000, so 18 years now, and I've been there for either 16 or 17 of those years. I'm not actually sure. And my role there is I take one of the problems with PC, which is there is a huge amount of choice in terms of hardware, and I turn that into a pro. So I spend my day looking at all the different processors and video cards and all that kind of stuff and testing them in Premiere Pro, DaVinci Resolve, After Effects, to determine which ones are actually good. Because it's really easy to spend more money and get worse performance. So I turn the problem of PC of too much stuff and turn it into here's the right choices. And we do have a table down at the VIP lounge. If anyone wants to come by, we'll be out there. So one of the issues though that we have as a workstation manufacturer is, I mean, we're hardware nerds. We're tech geeks. So we're not actually filmmakers and colorists and all that stuff. So we like to work with people like Mike here to be kind of our head to the ground. Like we can go to him and ask him like, hey, is this something people actually are worried about? And he'd come to us and say, no, stop worrying about that. Worry about this instead. So like, yeah, we've known each other for what, like 4 years now? We've been working together.
Yeah. I met you guys about 4 years ago. My name is Mike Pecci. I am a director. I've been directing movies and music videos for about 18 years. I ended up hooking up with you guys right around the time that I was incredibly frustrated with my edit system.
Right, yeah, because I guess we should state here that you were on Mac before you started working with us, and that's when you transitioned to PC.
Yeah, I mean, everybody was. I mean, that was kind of the thing. Like, if you were a filmmaker, if you were a real filmmaker, you were on some sort of Apple product or a Mac product,
Yeah, so what kind of started you down that path of deciding that the Macs you were using weren't up to the task or weren't able to do what you needed?
Well, I mean, it's pretty simple. Like, I was in the process of editing a project that I was doing, and I had a random software upgrade. You know how when you are on your Apple and there's that constant annoying sort of update now thing that happens? I think I accidentally clicked it, and after the upgrade happened, my timeline that I was working on 15 minutes before wouldn't run right.
Really? Jeez.
So like it was just this instant thing that had happened. And so in a panic, you try to figure out what is the next step, like how do I finish this project? At the time, my business partner was like, we should probably upgrade. Not being able to open and work with that stuff was more than a hindrance. It was death for us.
Yeah. So that kind of which started you down that path, right? So when you decided that you, because I believe you moved from Final Cut to Premiere, right?
Well, yeah, Premiere really stepped up. Adobe stepped up and they said, look, we will open all those old projects. We can actually go through the process of integrating that into our current workflow. And I hadn't even considered Premiere because, I had used Premiere years prior to that. I really wasn't into it. It just seemed like a clunky edit system. And their upgrades and their newest version of stuff was really smooth. And so it was a no-brainer at that point. It's like, okay, well, cool, let's jump onto Adobe. Adobe runs on Mac, so we can get the Adobe thing.
Yeah, so was it, like, I mean, personally, I haven't, like, made a major shift like that in a lot of the software I use. So moving from Final Cut to Premiere, did you have to deal with, like, moving current projects over? Did you try to do it in between projects so you didn't have to worry about, like,
Yeah, I mean, we were kind of desperate at that point anyway.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, because, you don't want to have you don't want to promise a client that you can pull something off.
Sure.
And then, there's nothing worse than going back home and going like, this is not working. How are we going to do this? And so you can only, buy time for a certain amount of time. So for us, we were just like, okay, we need something that works. If we're going to say to our clients that we're going to provide them with this at a certain deadline, then we need to figure this out now. So I think we dropped pretty much everything to just sort of figure this out.
Straight over.
Okay.
Yeah. So you if I remember right, because I mean we've talked about this quite a few times in the past. Yeah. You were on the fence of building your own systems when you decided that, hey, there's no reason for me to stay on Mac, and you started looking at PC. What was that kind of like initial experience that you were going through when you finally kind of, made it in your head that, hey, I'm going to stop using Apple, I'm going to swap over?
I mean, honestly, it was when you go to their website and you start to put together a shopping cart.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you look at the tally on the shopping cart, and you're like, this isn't even for 4K, and this is where I am right now. And when I was younger as a kid, I used to build systems for gaming, and I used to do that. In the back of my head, I'm like, God, I can build this cheaper. Like I know what they're putting together here, but then being a responsible business person, I didn't want to become IT for my company at the same time. And my business partner was like, born from the Mac system. So he was, PCs are scary, and virus and keyboard shortcuts don't work on it, so like there's all that I had to deal with. So I had to do the research, the hard research at that time, because no one was really talking about an alternative. I'm like, okay, are there people out there that are putting together edit systems that are PC or Linux or anything else besides Mac? And then what is the support for them? Because most of the stuff at that time was really for gaming, not for our industry.
Yeah, even honestly, Puget, we started off as kind of general computing and gaming for the longest time. So it wasn't until like 6 or 7 years ago that we started really shifting over. Because gaming, even if you're building a computer for gaming, it's not that difficult. There's benchmarks and all reviews and all that stuff, and they're all focused towards that. But you're right, if you were talking about Premiere Pro, that's very different than all that stuff. Plus, your time, you make your money by spending your time on making films.
Yeah,
not on,
exactly.
Trying to figure out the labyrinth of hardware and supporting it and all that. Okay, so let's kind of talk about, so once you had made that move, were there any, like, right from the get-go things you had to deal with?
You have to deal with, first off, if you're making a jump like that, you have to sort of figure out like what the learning curve is going to be for folks that don't use it. Which, a lot of the guys that I worked with were nervous about that because they hadn't used a PC, and for them on the outskirts, it's like this is this Wild West sort of thing. And I tried explaining to them, I'm like, it's the same stuff, guys. Like it's a folder system. There's like icons, like. You install the program you want to use, and you click on the icon, and the program loads, and you edit in that program.
Like because Premiere's Premiere.
Exactly.
It's the same thing.
But the big difference, and I knew this, the big difference is that when you're using a Mac, they like try to keep it as foolproof as possible. So they'll keep you from going into certain folders. They'll hide folders from you. They'll hide all this stuff. And more often than not, when we're, especially with like autosave, sometimes it'll bury these autosave files in some hidden folder structure where if I'm trying to rescue a project, I can't find it.
Really? No.
Yeah, and so like you actually have to go through like the show all folders, and you have to kind of know the behind the scenes to try to figure that out. And with PC, there isn't any of that. Like, Windows is very open, and you can customize it to however you want it to be. I prefer the option to be able to tool around with my tools and not have things closed off to me.
So, like I think we said before, like we started working like 4 years ago, kind of together.
Yeah.
And I still remember that first system you got from us because it had a couple of unique things that you just can't get on a Mac. One of those, I remember it had 4 solid-state drives in a RAID 5 because you really wanted a large amount of internal storage that was really fast. What was the reasoning behind wanting something like that? Because if you're on a Mac ecosystem, you'd be working with external drives for that kind of a thing. So was that just like a nice thing, a nice to have, or was that really at that time like a requirement for your workflow?
Well, the clients whether you're dealing with delivering to places like Netflix, or if you're even down to just doing corporate work or commercial work, everybody gets jazzed up about the newest thing. And 4K and larger formats have become the thing that is almost a standard now. And so for us, editing with external drives with higher file formats, like 4K, it's infuriating because the drives will oftentimes go to sleep, or you'll get bottlenecking, whether you're using Thunderbolt or USB 3. And sure, if you have like one sequence, or if you have one timeline in a sequence with that stuff, then you get pretty fluid playback. But if you look at my projects, when I cut things, it's like stacks of video layers.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And so you just physically can't do that with external hard drives.
Right.
And so for us, we wanted, I mean, we were lucky to get that Samsung stuff, but for us, we wanted to have enough storage space in the computer to be able to dump everything that we shot raw in there, and then to be able to cut real time. Because there's, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're trying to tell a story that we have in our mind, and oftentimes these ideas are very fleeting.
Right.
And so, especially in the edit room, where you're like, oh, what if I take this shot and this shot, and I try to put these together, and you're trying to do it as real time as possible because you're actually trying to feel what the audience is going to feel when you view these things. And so when your timeline stutters or if it lags, it pulls you out of the moment. And so it's really difficult for you to time that correctly for the audience.
Right. So you're just looking for anything that would remove any of those chances of lag or
I mean, you should see the rooms that we cut in. Like we shut off all the lights, we get rid of any sort of distracting stuff, because at the end of the day, I'm trying to focus on what you as a viewer are doing, and any sort of external distraction is aggravating because you're getting, it's like sitting in a movie theater next to a guy on his phone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Very good example here at the film festival.
Yeah.
So you actually name dropped Samsung there for a second. I actually want to touch on that for a sec because that's another place that it's an interesting benefit on the PC side that I don't think a lot of people realize. Like Apple has their like list of hardware that goes into this machine and doesn't change. Like the Mac Pro that was launched 2013, hardware is exactly the same whether it was built 2 months ago or 5 years ago.
Right.
Versus on the PC side, one of the things we do as a workstation manufacturer is we track all the things that you as a filmmaker don't want to worry about. Like we look at failure rates and performance and all these numbers and charts and graphs. And Samsung's a good example because there's a lot of different like storage drives we could use.
Right.
But we stick with Samsung because we know that they are reliable. We've done all the failure rate analysis. And I mean, that comes in from other things too, but they're just kind of a good example of where we've taken the choice that's available on PC and then narrowed it down to this is the best option, do this kind of a thing.
But there's something really nice about that. I think that when you start to see a larger company, like a huge company, say that they're doing these things, that they're running bench tests, you know, being the ignorant person that I am, I just imagine that there's some sort of computer there just like processing this stuff, and they're not real human beings doing that. And I think the one real thing that appealed to me about working with a smaller company like you guys is that I physically know that you're doing it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so being able to turn to my clients and say, look, this system has been tested. And not tested on some sort of like production line. This has been tested by an individual, and here are the readouts for that. So I can promise you that I'm not going to have a failed hard drive on this thing. There's something really nice about that instead of like buying like a, you know, like a care plan where it's like, you know, we think our stuff's going to work so well here, buy this care plan. And to me, it's like, okay, that's just a way for you to get out of the fact that it's not actually been tested correctly. It might fail. Like I said, I'm ignorant to these things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's the kind of thing that you don't want to have to worry about.
Yeah.
That's not your job. That's not what you want to do with your life.
Please.
So something else I kind of want to talk about, because we visited you on one of your recent shoots out in Boston. It was actually my first time in Boston. It was awesome. I loved it.
Oh, cool.
But we brought along with us a little system for you to use for DIT work on set. And it was, I say little system, but it was a very powerful system. I think it was about the same as the system that you actually have at your office and that you're actually doing the edits on.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome. Like whenever, like I'm sure a lot of you guys that make movies understand this. When you're on set, what you're trying to do is you're trying to back up all of your footage safely, because now that you're not shooting film and now that you're not shooting to tape, everything's down to ones and zeros. And there's this process of backing that footage up, and it's a real complicated process. And a lot of folks, especially in the indie world, don't do it right.
Yeah.
Where they just sort of stack up a bunch of cards, and then they have a PA or some sort of assistant sloppily sort of transferring this stuff. It's a huge concern, because if you lose data, if you lose that stuff, it's thousands of dollars.
Right.
Like one shot is thousands of dollars.
Well, especially if you don't catch it until after you're done with your shoot
Exactly,
entirely. Then, oh.
exactly. So the position of like a data transfer person or a data transfer technician is super important on set. And most of the time, you're seeing it on a low budget facility, like a low budget film. It's usually someone with an iMac, or like a laptop, like a MacBook Pro, rather. And you're sort of sitting there and you're sort of cruising through the footage, make sure it plays back, make sure that it's audio recorded, make sure it's cool, and then you can format those cards, which is like the most dangerous thing of it. And a lot of times on those little laptops, especially if you're dealing with 4K, it doesn't play back real time.
Right.
You're using like VLC or something to view that stuff. And so it's kind of hacky.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they have some sort of software. They have different software companies that create backups for you. You could do that. But I've always wanted the opportunity to have my movie being cut on the set.
Well, that was actually what was happening here, right? Like
Yeah.
the guy was like just in one of the rooms of this place we were filming at.
Yeah.
And I remember it, but yeah, as you were shooting, he would ingest the media, he'd do all the backups.
I remember laughing because we were running smoke machines, because we made this little horror movie. And we're running smoke machines in the kitchen, and the smoke is billowing into the space that he's editing. So you just walk in, and he's silhouetted by this giant 4K monitor, and it's just smoke everywhere. It was rad, not just for like, oh cool, but also for crew and everybody, because your team can actually be checking in on it. And it's all about continuity.
Right.
You know, like how does the quality of light look in the close-up in the wide shot? And a lot of times we're shooting out of sequence because of scheduling. So it's really nice to be able to sort of walk in that room and tap on the DIT shoulder and go, hey, bring up, you know, the shot. And you're not staring at like a fingerprinted laptop screen.
Right.
You're actually in a space where it's playing back the full resolution real time, which is nice, because then you can see all the little details. You can see, oh, wait a minute, we use that prop in the background. And then from a performance standpoint, he was actually able to start to cut these sequences together, which is always the nerve-wracking thing as a director. I do shot lists, I do all that, but you never really know.
Right.
And then, you know, you never know how, like, you know, the hug between us cuts together in the wide and the master. So to be able to see that on set and then go, oh, I need an insert, or I need a close-up here, this sequence really isn't flowing right. And it's not like it's the final cut, but he's just sort of piecing these elements together, so that way I can look at it and go, okay, this is what a movie feels like. This is what the scene feels like. And it helps with actors, because you're trying to get, your main job as a director is that you're trying to get a group of strangers often to trust you. You know, it's like, get into my leaky submarine, it'll be fine. You know what I mean? Like you're attempting to do that. And with the ability to see a scene or see something cut together early on, people will immediately understand your vibe, immediately understand your vision, and then they are on board.
So it didn't even help you with just the fact that like that the rough cut was done and like all the media was ingested on and all that. It actually improved like the shoot itself. Actually, you're saying. Yeah.
Oh, all right. Look, you're a nerd.
I'm super nerd.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we talk about tech stuff. The truth of the matter is that all this stuff they're just tools. They're tools ultimately for a storyteller. And this art form is really strange. It's not like being a painter or like an illustrator where I go and I pick up a couple of pencils and I do my task. I'm dealing with human beings, which are a huge part of my brush selection. And then I'm dealing with this technology that within the past like 15 years is so unstable. Like everything's shifting constantly. What format you're supposed to be doing, what delivery you're supposed to be doing, like how does it, and so it becomes this sort of overwhelming, confusing thing that oftentimes controls your creativity.
Right.
And I don't want that. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so verbal about the options for this, because a lot of folks don't realize that. A lot of people just sit there And they go, okay, look, if I buy this thing and if I do this, then I'm going to be a filmmaker. And then when they're trying to make their project, and that tool, whether it's a camera or a light or whatever it is, doesn't do what they want, it ends there for them. Or they have to change their vision, they have to change their idea. And I'd much rather have, with all my tools, whether it's cameras or whether it's my grip gear, that stuff is going to bend to my will. That's the important part about it for me. And ultimately, so I'll tie it all back together into the sales pitch. That's why I got a PC, was because at the end of the day, when I do a project, if I'm doing it right, it should be a hard thing to do. And then I want to be able to just go, you know what, for a couple extra bucks, I can open up this box and put in this piece of hardware or swap this thing out that is going to be more than what I need for this. And then at the end of the day, I don't want to be the guy that has to do the tech on all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I remember, I know we've done upgrades on your systems.
Hell yeah.
I know we've just sent you a new an upgraded video card and you've swapped it in. And yeah, I mean, that's totally, I mean, we're talking about why you should move from Mac to PC, and that right there is a huge reason. I mean, if you bought a Mac Pro or an iMac Pro or whatever, and you didn't get the top-end video card that you can buy
for that day, time, month, or whatever
yeah,
it is, like specific.
And if you decide later, hey, I'm working with red footage, I need a lot more GPU power, you can't do anything. Like you're going to buy a new Mac, or you're going to like sell your old one to try to make back some of the money.
There's no such thing as like longevity with that stuff. I feel like it's all expendable. Like it's the buy and throw out mentality.
Well, that's why, I mean, I still, because we go to a lot of trade shows and events and stuff, and I'm always amazed at how many people have those old Mac towers, the kind of like cheese grater thing.
Yeah.
And people love those things because they have been like upgrading them constantly and trying to do all these things. Now it's still like 10-year-old hardware that the base. Yeah, they're hitting the very limit of what they can do with that.
We did that. We upgraded our old tower a few times. Here's the problem. As soon as you open it, and as soon as you put in some sort of aftermarket product, then Mac's like, see ya.
Yeah.
Like, support's gone, like, all that's gone. And so as soon as you pull the system apart, which is like, don't do this, put special screws in the back so that you can't do this. As soon as you do that, you're on your own.
Yeah.
Completely. Ultimately, I needed you guys to build me a system that could handle 4K when 4K was at its infancy. And at that time, we started to use some early red stuff. We were doing red work specifically because the project called for it. So, like, I don't just pick a camera because it's a hot product at that time. You sort of pick a tool that works specifically for what you're doing. So I knew that red shot raw stuff, uncompressed. And ultimately, it would capture, very similar to what still photography has always done, which is it'll capture varying degrees of exposure within a certain range. So when you're actually shooting outside wide shots in the elements on a low budget, I can't physically control the sun. I can't control the contrast. And so sometimes it's really nice to have the ability to pull up the shadows without getting noise or grain. So we made the creative decision to shoot a lot of this music video, because we were doing music videos for this band called Kill Switch Engage. And we were driving up and down the coast of California and shooting on cliffs and stuff. It was really pretty stuff. We made the decision to do that because we knew we weren't going to have control. And then the negative of that is that the file sizes for that at that time were huge, massive.
Right.
And then you're like, okay, so I can't cut with the raw stuff, right? Because that's never going to play back. And so then you're dealing with the whole proxies, transcoding, and then offlining and onlining, and then it's always a nightmare. And even if it's on its best day, you're still putting aside at least 2 or 3 days to just manage all that stuff. There are companies that call their like online artists or something just because they have to give these guys a creative title because their job position is the most frustrating thing in the world. Like, where did this clip go? And why is this clip named differently? So at the end of the day, all I wanted to do was be able to take that red footage and drop it in the timeline and then cut with it. And then in Premiere, you can actually mess with the raws simply in Premiere with Lumetri and everything else. So that was the goal for us when we put that system together. And you guys built us a system that allowed us to do, I think it was like up to 3 layers of video real time in 4K or something like that.
Sounds about right for the time, about 4 years ago. I know today, I mean, it depends on the compression levels, right? But it's around like 4 or 5 is what you can do today.
Yeah.
At 4K at least. But yeah, so if you had still been on a Mac, like you mentioned, you would have been having to deal with proxies and all that kind of stuff versus once you got RPC, you just
I just brought the R3D files right into the timeline and started to cover them.
I mean, yeah. So that's a lot of time savings, even just right there, and not having to deal with like going back from the proxies afterwards and dealing with issues with that.
Yeah. And then you can color grade on the fly. So a lot of times you have to use suspension of disbelief if you're looking at footage that is flat. And you're like, well, I don't know why I can't get into this performance of the scene, and you're looking at it going, no, it's because it doesn't look good, So like, there's something nice about being able to do like a rough color pass with the actual footage.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm not a filmmaker, but I know what you mean.
Yeah.
So let's so we've talked about like all the amazing things of PC, why it's all better and why it's all rainbows and unicorns and all that. So let's kind of get into some of I'm not quite gotchas, but like little speed bumps that you kind of had to deal with, or that a lot of these people might have to deal with if they do decide to move over from the Mac ecosystem over to PC. Was there any one thing that was like the number one issue you ran into when you started to make that move?
Honestly, it's just the file formatting for the different operating systems.
Really? So
that was
like
the first
HFS
thing.
Plus and NTFS and all that.
Yeah, because they, of course, both systems, they're like two angry, X's.
They don't like each other, and they don't read each other.
Yeah, so that was the first big thing in finding Paragon software that allows you to load a Mac drive on both a PC and a Mac, and write to and copy to and do all that stuff was like crucial.
Yeah,
because a lot of our old drives are all Mac formatted, and then, like I was saying before, a lot of the vendors that we work with, whether it's like sound mixers or VFX guys, they're still in the Mac format. So if we send them drives, if we send them stuff, they have to be able to load it and mess with it.
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned Paragon. I mean, this isn't like a plug for them or anything, but they're just a good example. So they allow either Macs to read the Windows file system or Windows to read the Mac file system, so that your external drives, you can move between the machines and everything. Read and write, yeah. Yeah, because I think Macs can natively read Windows-based external drives, but they can't write to it, yeah. But it's not like that's not an expensive piece of software either. It's like $20.
It's like $20 or something like that. It's cake. And they do, I think it's not subscrition based or something, so they're constantly upgrading, or I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, they're just the one. I know there's several others too out there. So, but so like all of these issues, there's solutions. To all of these things, and sometimes it's just you can either do the research yourself, or you can be working with someone like us who we've either done that research ourselves, or we've worked with someone like you, and you say, hey, I use this software, and then we know it, and we can pass that on to other people as well.
That was a big part for us. And once we knew that we could do that, then that really sort of put us at ease, ultimately.
Yeah.
That was like the big hurdle for us.
So for the people here who might be doing that, so since you switched over most of your systems in your studio to a PC, did you decide to move over like your new external drives that you're getting for new projects? Are you formatting those for Windows now, or are you keeping them with the HFS file system for Mac, just for backwards compatibility and all that?
No, we keep them formatted for Mac because a lot of times, unless I get that super sweet system from you guys to do the IT stuff, a lot of times we're still dealing with MacBook Pros on set, and so like the data is stored on the Mac format when we start.
Okay.
And so we just like to keep it simple. If we have them all formatted Mac, we know our machines are. We tend to go like our machines are better than anybody else's machines right now. So we know that they can handle all these things. So we'll downgrade our other things so that you guys can play catch up. And that's kind of how we keep things with our vendors. Is like we'll take on the responsibility of making sure that you can run
is.
Okay. Yeah. So that was the biggest issue. I know. I'll bring up one of my own that I know we get asked all the time whenever we talk to people at trade shows and events and stuff, and that's ProRes. Yeah, because people are always like, they're not sure, like, because it used to be with Premiere years ago, you had to have QuickTime installed to be able to work with ProRes, and then QuickTime got, dropped. You should not install QuickTime on Windows, please don't do that. But now I don't think a lot of people realize that, like, the newer versions of Premiere for a while now, they natively support ProRes, at least for editing, ingesting, and working with it and all that.
Yeah.
But exporting, cannot export to ProRes, unfortunately, on PC, at least natively from Premiere.
I mean, but we've cheated. Like there's like a bunch of like secondhand software companies that have made little hacks for it. So, and you know what? That's one of the cool things about PC still is that I feel like if it doesn't exist, there are users out there that make something that do exist.
Right.
And that has always been a PC thing, whether it's from the old days of gaming or not. There are communities of people that are like, well, they haven't figured this out, so we'll figure it out. And most of the time, their stuff they figured out runs a lot smoother than the stuff that you purchase. So, like, there is a bunch of different tricks and hacks to be able to make that stuff work.
Yeah, I know your probably simplest is, I know you were just like exporting out to like DNX or something, and then copying that over to an old Mac you had around the office, and then you just transcoded it out.
Yeah. We still have like a little Mac that we dust off just to do renders every now and then. Yeah. But we don't, we try not to even connect it online, because as soon as we connect it online, Apple finds a way to upgrade it, and then that thing becomes useless.
Yeah, I mean, when you have a tool, when it's a tool that does one specific job, you don't care.
Yeah,
like,
just leave it alone.
Yeah.
Leave it alone. Don't touch it. I don't want someone going out there and upgrading my shovel so suddenly I can't dig into pavement. Like, just leave it alone.
So something else I know, I think you mentioned this briefly before. You're talking about your coworker and how he's very much about keyboard shortcuts.
He's a wuss. Yeah,
he's a wuss. Because that is one thing too. Because you can take a Mac keyboard and use it on a PC. Like you totally can. The problem is then like all the keys aren't exactly right. Like you're hitting Option and it's actually I don't even know what, like a Windows key or Control or whatever. But did you just dive in and just decide I'm going to retrain my muscle memory for these shortcuts and all that, or did you? I know there's some third-party utilities that will like remap those keys so it has the same muscle memory.
Yeah, I mean my business partner is more about muscle memory, so he's the type that would go through and get those special what do you call them, where they can read
like keyboard remappers or something.
Yeah,
like
something
that.
like that, where he gets his keyboard so it flows like a Mac keyboard. But even now, I think he's now onto the PC sort of setup. I mean, it's not that difficult. It's like one or two keys off.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like you play with it, and the thing about editing is that it is your life when you do it. So you clock about 1,500 hours.
Yeah.
So like when you're doing it, after a while, it's fine. It works fine. The systems boot up super fast. Like it's such a painless transition, and I think it's odd that we actually have to sit here and talk about it, because so many people are afraid to make this jump because they're afraid of the boogeyman when it comes to any other sort of system. And honestly, guys, it doesn't exist.
Well, yeah, because I think that so many people think of PCs as like the PC they had in their house when they were 8 years old or whatever, like the old 386 or whatever. And that's not what PCs are anymore. Like a lot of it comes down to who you buy from and the quality of it. I mean, if you're going bottom of the barrel, you want to spend $400. Like, yeah, it's going to be probably not the greatest experience.
Yeah.
But I just always like to point out to people, like people act surprised when they bring up blue screens, and I tell them like, no, if you get a blue screen, that's not normal. Like, you should be reporting it to support because your computer has a problem. So that's not the norm.
I get more damaged screens, or I don't even know if you call it blue screen. I get more of that on Mac than I do on my PC.
Yeah.
And these days, like that spinning pinwheel of death for anything. Like I'm just opening up my email client, and I have that spinning pinwheel of death. It drives me nuts. Surprise! And my business partner wasn't, like I said, he was Apple all the way through.
Yeah.
And then he started doing the PC stuff, and he's not complaining about things.
Oh.
Like you would come into the office and say, "Oh, I had a crash," you know what I mean? And now he's at that point where he's not complaining about things. And so it's doing its job. It's working really well, and it's just like I said, it just there's the sense of comfort in the fact that we can make this thing do what we need it to do, which I like about it.
Yeah, you know, I was actually I don't want to. We don't want to turn this into a Mac Bash Fest or anything, but I was surprised. I was doing a whole bunch of testing on the Mac Pro and a couple of the new iMac Pros, which we actually put out a couple of performance articles just like a couple of days ago. We had to get them out before we went to Nashville. But yeah, I was surprised at how many more issues I had in Premiere on the Mac systems, like consistent, that I could like repeat. One of them was whenever I was trying to use, it was 6K ARRI RAW, and if I tried to do full res, which by the way is not going to be good on Mac or PC, like, it's a little bit too much. But I was actually getting crashes fairly regularly. Like Premiere was just crashing it. And all that when I think it was when I was trying to do render into outlets on that.
Okay.
But yeah, it was. I mean, that's one data point. I mean, that's the hard part with like, you know, reliability and all that kind of stuff. Is, you know, you have your experience, I have my experience. Doesn't mean it's going to be the same as everyone else. So that's the hardest thing to kind of get across to people, is that like these are not unique experiences.
No. But I mean, okay. But then my argument. This is why I went through the process of trying to find someone that would help with support. Is that I can throw it at you and just go, I don't know what's going on. I haven't been able to find anything online. I don't understand what this process is. Can you please take a look at this and tell me what your experiences are? There's something really nice about that. I mean, I think I sat for 2 days with Apple support, waiting for them to change my password for one of my logins.
Really?
Yeah.
Jeez.
So like the difference in tech support is massive, and like there's no, you can't go to their website and go, oh, here's the number for their techs, and then call up their techs and be like, guys, I'm having a problem with this. Like, it doesn't exist. You're on some sort of online thing, and then you're talking to somebody who's passing you up the chain, and so doing tech support on a lot of that bigger stuff becomes like a 5-hour task. And
when all you want to do is just do your job.
I gotta log in, guys. I don't know why I can't log in right now, and I have a client breathing down my neck. Or I turned my computer on today and it didn't do what it's supposed to do, which is start up. I don't know why it's not doing that.
And you know, that's one of the ways where I really feel we have Puget Systems, like we're unique, because, you know, Apple does give good support for a lot of stuff, like absolutely. But if you have a issue in Premiere Pro, I'll give an example here. I actually don't know if I passed this on to you. The latest version of Premiere Pro is like 12.1, and the one that came out in April. It's actually has some performance issues. On the PC side, if you're trying to work with ProRes footage, performance can tank, like really bad in live playback, really bad on export. But oddly enough, because we were doing this Mac testing, we found that the same thing happens on Mac, not with ProRes, but with Red footage. And that's the kind of thing that, like,
So
you know, we've had plenty of our customers contact us, and we can just, you know, we can ask, well, okay, well, what kind of footage you're working with? They say ProRes, we say roll back to the 12.0 point. And then they roll back and they're done, and they just go. So that's, you know, a big advantage of, you know, even within the PC ecosystem, of going with someone that you know is working with the same software packages you are.
Exactly, especially in the time period where everything's subscription-based right now. So like the updates just keep coming.
Yeah, well, yeah, because like those Premiere updates, like, you know, those things have been out since April, and even us, like, we're doing benchmarking, you know, quite often and all that, and we didn't even catch it until 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago.
Do not envy you guys at all. I do not envy that process. I think it's got to be the most frustrating process known to man, where you guys are trying to figure things out, and you finally get the system in place, and then they're like, here's a random update, and you're like, oh.
It's job security.
Yeah.
It's good. It's good.
Yeah, man. And look, I don't want to bash Apple. I mean, truth of the matter is, my laptop right now is still one of these. They do great stuff, but it's the old one where I have all my ports. The new ones don't have all the ports.
No, I mean, honestly,
but yeah, I don't bash on those guys. I just, once they stopped caring about us as artists, and once they stopped supporting us as artists, then, and
they had us all fooled because they're like, we're going to do that. And then they just didn't all of a sudden. And you're like, oh my God. And I can't pull this thing apart and I can't fix this thing myself. Oh God, I'm screwed. And so that was the moment for me that I was like, I got to get out. I got to jump ship on this.
Yeah. You know, I think Apple makes amazing products as long as it has a battery. Like if it's an iPhone, so a MacBook, I think they've like really nailed it down. But like you said, I think they've kind of stopped worrying so much about the content creation market. You know, they finally released some iMac Pros that I guess are supposed to be, you know, replacements to the Mac Pro, but they still have the Mac Pro on their website. They're still pushing it. They're still selling it.
Yeah.
And it's old. Like you don't want to tell people how to buy better Mac stuff, but you can get an iMac Pro for the same price that's significantly faster than the Mac Pro, and then you get a screen, you get all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So it's just like their whole business model has more shifted from the content creation professional markets over to like the mass, you know, people have, you know, our laptops and all that stuff at home, and they're just doing it for home stuff.
Yeah. I mean, there's a tool for every job.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm trying to figure out here if there's anything else we should be talking about. And if anyone has any questions about, you know, anything that they're worried about, feel free to raise your hand or speak up or whatever. I think we have just a little bit more time. So let's see. Is there any other? I'm trying to think if there's any other concerns, questions, problems that we get asked or that you might have off the top of your head where you know, that's kind of just a worry when people are making the move from Mac to PC. I mean, we've already touched on, you know, ProRes and the external drives. We already touched on support and making sure you're getting from good people. I
mean, there isn't a lot.
Yeah.
And that's the surprising part about it. There isn't a lot. And in the beginning, there was always something so comforting about being like, hey, I could just go to this website and I could choose one of these choices and, ooh, look at all this stuff. And then you just choose it. And then you have it shipped to you and you have like some sort of amazing unboxing experience. And then you plug it in. And that was always their sales pitch.
Yeah.
I was
amazed. Again, we got a couple of iMac Pros in, and yeah, their unboxing is amazing.
Oh God! Like, and so you're just like, I'm a special person. Oh, and you open this thing up and you go through this whole thing. And yeah, sure. You know, with my laptop that I have from them, I've had this thing for years, and it's great. It does its job. But as a business owner, when the equipment that you are indebted to, like physically indebted to, stops doing your job before you paid it off, and then you're then having to upgrade again and just roll over into this constant payment plan. There hits a point when your tools are supposed to make you profit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like there's a point where you charge for all this stuff, and then you make that profit based upon it, so that you can then invest in future stuff as you continue. I mean, that's part of what the business plan is.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. You're talking about like renting and all that kind of stuff, because I think some people they look at these kind of things and they think that, well, okay, well, if I want to get into PC, I have to shell out $8,000 like out of my pocket, and a lot of people can't do that, especially if they're just getting into film. They're just really starting to do it for themselves. So I do just want to mention that, like, that's not the only option. Like, we even do, it's leasing. We can do leasing. We can do payment plans and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of flexibility that, yeah, I just think people don't even realize it exists.
Which isn't a bad deal. I mean, when I shoot, I don't buy cameras because cameras upgrade so quick, and you're talking about hundreds of thousands, well, not hundreds, but you're talking about thousands of dollars just to purchase this specific camera that is going to be hot in the market for like 6 months. And then the reality of it is, if you're an independent filmmaker, you're oftentimes having to throw equipment in for free just to get the job. And so like you're not even making that return on your purchase. And so there's this whole level of overhead that most filmmakers have, because they have to go buy a camera. Have to go buy a lighting package, have to go buy an edit system, have to go buy this stuff, and the next thing you know, you're like $28,000 in the hole, and you're now out on the marketplace, which is oversaturated with all of us as it is, and so you're trying to be competitive, and so then you're going through the process of saying, well, I won't charge for my gear, or I won't charge for these things, and then at the end of the day, you're never getting out, of the hole, and you're barely paying for rent, you know, and so I don't be a slave and I know you guys put together products, but don't be a slave to manufacturers.
No, never.
Like seriously, like just, it's about making movies. I didn't get into this business because I like computers. Like I got into this business because I like to make movies. I actually like to tell stories. I like to do that stuff. And me understanding how these things work is a byproduct of what it is that I like. Sometimes it's rewarding, most of the time it's irritating byproduct of it. And that exists with everything else, cameras and actors and the whole line of it. So just don't let this convolute why we do what we do, which is tell stories, which is have a fun time with the crew. You know what I mean? Which is like experience life.
You got a question?
So you were talking about ProRes. I think most clients want ProRes because of the name at this point.
Yeah.
Have you had any luck trying to convince them to take a PC-based codec instead?
It depends on who the clients are.
Yeah, so just in case anyone couldn't hear, so this question is, so we're talking about ProRes before, and if Mike's had any success getting people to accept not ProRes or something else as the delivered.
Yeah, I mean, we've messed around with the GoPro codec there. What's it called?
Cineform.
And the Avid formats there, the DNXs. The DNXs are a little bit more temperamental, I think. Yeah, dude, it just depends. Like, we have clients, like certain broadcast clients and stuff that are like, it has to be ProRes. And you're like, okay, well, I'll transcode that on my old system, or until a few weeks ago, we'll use our new ProRes encoding, which does it. But it just depends, man. Like, you know, if we're delivering for the internet, we'll deliver like high-end H.264 footage, you know, and then just have all that stuff backed up on our end. Really, the frustrating thing about our business in general right now is that you get like a 6K camera. You get like these high-end new like airy light panels that have every color known to man, and you're in your edit space with like high-end 4K monitors, and you're like, I can see every detail and every bit of contrast, and then you just process it, and then crop it in for a FaceTime real-time video, or like an Instagram story video, and that's the delivery of it. And so you're sort of going like, why did I shoot this on 6K? Like, why did I do all this stuff? You know, because it's all down to a phone at this point. There's a lot of stuff that we're putting on. So ProRes is like, sure. Sometimes we deal with that, but most of the time, you just have to convince your client. You got to remind your client what they're actually shooting and why they're shooting it. And, you know, to get into the filmmaking aspect of that, what I usually say to my clients are, okay, what's your budget? And then the client who reads the trade magazines goes, oh, we want to shoot with this camera, we want to have this. And I go, yeah, but your budget has this much. So how about I shoot with this inexpensive camera and we take that extra $5,000 and actually get a good wardrobe artist and get a really good makeup artist. So that way DP's not pulling his hair out because everybody looks awful in front of this super expensive camera they have. So you just got to be smart about it, you know. And I think that at the end of the day, if you're telling stories to tell stories, then choose your equipment wisely.
So one thing I actually just had in my head, remember another thing that we get a lot of people asking about is Thunderbolt. Now I don't think you actually use any Thunderbolt.
No, because Thunderbolt was specifically a Mac thing, but now it's PC, isn't it?
Yeah, so it was. I kind of like to explain this because a lot of people do have Thunderbolt drives, especially if they were on Mac for a long time. So Thunderbolt on PC was terrible for a very long time. I would outright say that. And it was a lot of it because Thunderbolt is actually a very complex port. It's not just data, it's got video, it's got data, it's got all this other stuff. And Apple was able to pull it off because they control everything. They control the hardware, they control the OS, they control the drivers, absolutely everything. And on the PC side, there was a lot of disconnect between everyone. So everyone was using like different versions of firmware and all of this and that. So Thunderbolt 2 was really bad on PC. Thunderbolt 3 now, which you can just use adapters down to Thunderbolt 2, that's actually usually good on the PC side. We've actually gone through a whole bunch of different products. You're doing a lot of like the vetting where, like we were saying before, you don't want to do that.
That's why I stayed away from Thunderbolt.
Yep. So we've gotten it down to like some of our systems do have Thunderbolt on it. So if you really do have a whole bunch of Thunderbolt drives and you need that's a requirement for you, you can still get that on PC. So you can do that. You don't have to worry about like replacing all of your drives that you purchased over the last 5 years or anything like that.
Is it at like the same speeds as a?
Oh yeah, yep. Because the nice thing about Thunderbolt is it's. I'm just trying to decide if I really want to get hardware nerdy over here, but it's straight to the bus, the data bus in the computer. So it's the same thing between Mac and PC or Linux or whatever you want to use. Cool. So it is there. It was a mess for the longest time, but finally
we just did mostly USB 3 and stuff, which was fast, not as fast as Thunderbolt. But
no, well, I mean, it depends on what you're using. If you've just got a normal platter drive in that enclosure, like Thunderbolt's not going to do anything for you.
Yeah, right.
Although that does actually remind me of something else. You were talking about your laptop and you love it. I remember you were saying this, I think either at lunch or right before lunch. One of the reasons you love it is because it has FireWire on it.
Yeah. It still has, I think it's got a FireWire 800 on it.
Yeah.
Which, a lot of my old drives still are FireWire 800.
Yeah, and that's something, if you wanted to do that and access FireWire drives on like your Mac Pro or whatever, you're looking at a lot of dongles, if it's even, I don't even know if it's possible. Actually.
I don't know anymore. I think it's like some sort of aftermarket stuff. Maybe.
Yeah, it's going to be aftermarket stuff at the very least. Whereas on the PC side, I mean, we have cards that we've qualified, we know work. You just, tell your, consultant like, hey, I need FireWire. They say, okay, it's like $30 or whatever, like done.
Yeah.
It'll work.
And you just put it right in the system.
Yep, and it's just integrated. It'll work. You don't have to worry about dongles or adapters or any of that kind of stuff.
Well, and there's also this whole bit on like I want a shiny little box. And the systems that you guys put together aren't ugly. So like, but they also have like a lot of room in them for the upgrade process. Like when they put out that trash can thing, and you're just like, well, that's gonna get thrown away because I can't upgrade anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
At all.
Yeah, I've actually always been surprised. I always try to push. We have the system that we use for the DIT. I love that thing. Maybe just because I travel a lot and you can stick it in a Pelican case and just take it with you and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Versus, we do larger systems that are, towers, standard PC size. And I'm always surprised at how many people go with that. Like, I love the small compact things.
But people still buy the big ones?
Way more than I always expect. And I think it's because they want to know that, like, hey, if I need to put a drive in, if I need to expand, or if I need to upgrade, it's way easier to do it in those big towers. I mean, you just take the side panel off and you're in, and you just do stuff. Versus the smaller compact things, and it's the same thing you run into with Macs too, where it's so compact that it's hard to be used as serviceable. On the PC side, at least, it still is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm always amazed at how many people, like, I think they realize that, hey, this thing is going to go under my desk.
Right.
I've got all this space down there. It really doesn't matter.
Well, and I want it to be under my desk for like 5-6 years.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You want to put it there and it stays there.
It just, it's not something that you're turning over in 3 years. Or it's not something that you're turning over in a year and a half.
Right. Yeah.
But
yeah, still, I'm just amazed at how many people go with the big stuff, big cases. I don't personally get it, but I understand it. So I think we actually only have a couple of minutes here. So I will remind again that we do have a table out in the VIP area. We actually sponsored the VIP lounge. If anyone hasn't noticed, because like ads going before each film, your face is giant up there.
I'll be out there signing autographs.
Yeah. But yeah, so we are out there. So feel free to drop by and